Hi there, fellow history wanderers. I hope you've made it through another long day and are finally settling in for the evening. Whether you're winding down from work, studies, or just life in general, I'm wishing you a peaceful night ahead. Tonight, we're diving into three fascinating yet dark corners of ancient history that reveal how ordinary people survived extraordinary circumstances. We'll explore the harsh reality behind Mesopotamian temple service, discover the extreme delicacies that graced Chinese imperial tables, and uncover the incredible story of the Terracotta Army's discovery. These aren't the sanitized tales from textbooks, but the raw human experiences that shaped civilizations. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's begin this journey through time. Picture this: you're 10 years old in ancient Mesopotamia, around 2300 BCE. Yesterday, your biggest worry was whether your clay doll had enough colorful beads strung around its neck. Today, your parents are using phrases like "Inanna has chosen you" with the kind of forced enthusiasm usually reserved for telling someone their meal tastes wonderful when it clearly doesn't. The goddess of love and fertility, they explain, has selected you for divine service. What they don't mention is that divine service is ancient Mesopotamian code for "we need to get rid of you," and the temple pays better than drowning you in the river. Let's be brutally honest about the economics here. In a world where daughters were considered expensive liabilities, the temple system provided a convenient solution wrapped in religious packaging. If your family couldn't scrape together a proper dowry, or if you had the misfortune of being born after your older sister, who already claimed the family's marriageable resources, congratulations, you just won a lifetime subscription to temple service. No trial period, no money-back guarantee, and the cancellation policy involved accusations of blasphemy, which typically ended with you becoming fish food in the Euphrates. The Temple of Inanna operated like a twisted non-profit organization. They accepted donations of all kinds: livestock that could be slaughtered, grain that could be stored, and unwanted daughters who could be repurposed. It was spiritual recycling with a dark twist, upcycling, but for human beings, and the emotional scarring was permanent. Your parents deliver you to the temple gates with the kind of pride usually reserved for presenting tribute to a conquering army. They've convinced themselves they're securing divine favor for the family. Meanwhile, you're clutching a small bundle of possessions and trying to understand why everyone keeps using the word blessed when their eyes look suspiciously wet. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. If this is such an honor, why does it feel like a funeral where the corpse is still breathing? The moment you cross the threshold, your old life dies a quick death. You're immediately renamed, because apparently your birth name isn't holy enough for temple work. The priests hand you a new identity, along with a ceremonial linen wrap that's supposed to represent your rebirth into sacred service. What it actually represents is the beginning of a life where your personal preferences, desires, and even your name no longer belong to you. The renaming ceremony itself is almost comically grim. They strip away your childhood identity with the efficiency of tax collectors, replacing it with something that sounds impressive in Sumerian, but roughly translates to property of the goddess. You're no longer Sarah or Miriam or whatever your parents called you. You're now Naditu, Quadishtu, or another title that marks you as temple property. It's rebranding, ancient style, designed to make your exploitation sound spiritually meaningful. Your new accommodations make a prison cell look luxurious. You're assigned a mat on a stone floor in a room that smells like burnt frankincense, mixed with decades of human misery. The air is thick with incense smoke that's supposed to purify the space, but mostly just irritates your lungs and makes everything taste like bitter herbs. Your roommates are other girls in various stages of acceptance and rebellion, all sharing the same shell-shocked expression of people who've realized they've been sold a bill of goods that turned out to be counterfeit. The temple priests greet you with the kind of hollow enthusiasm that makes funeral directors seem genuinely joyful by comparison. They have that particular brand of religious authority that combines spiritual superiority with practical ruthlessness. Men who can bless your sacred calling while calculating exactly how much profit your body will generate for the temple. Coffers. Their smiles never reach their eyes, and their frequent references to your body being the goddess's temple start sounding less like honor and more like a property deed. Sleep becomes a luxury when you're sharing space with girls who cry quietly into their mats. Homesick children who haven't yet learned that longing for home is a weakness the priests will use against you. The temple operates on a strict schedule that begins before dawn and ends well after sunset, designed to keep you too exhausted to think clearly about your situation. Exhaustion, they've discovered, makes people more compliant. Your first meal at the temple consists of lentil porridge that tastes like wet clay and flatbread hard enough to use as a weapon. The priests explain that simple food keeps your spiritual focus sharp, which is temple speak for we're spending the food budget on fancier ingredients for the upper-level clergy. You're given just enough nutrition to keep working, but not enough to feel satisfied. Hunger, like exhaustion, has a way of breaking down resistance. The most psychologically devastating part isn't the physical discomfort, it's the slow realization that your parents knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't divine selection or spiritual calling. This was a business transaction disguised as religious devotion, and you were the commodity being sold. The blessing they kept talking about was really just their relief at solving a financial problem by gifting you to a system that would extract value from your body until it was no longer profitable. Welcome to temple service, where childhood ends abruptly and adulthood begins with the understanding that your life belongs to people who measure devotion in barley and silver. When most people imagine ancient temples, they picture serene sanctuaries filled with gentle incense, soft chanting, and perhaps a wise priest humming peacefully while golden light filters through carved windows. The reality of the Temple of Inanna was less spiritual wellness retreat and more like a chaotic administrative office run by religious bureaucrats with a side business in human trafficking. Your first morning begins with the harsh reality that this sacred space has all the ambience of a poorly managed livestock market. You step into the main courtyard, expecting divine tranquility, and are instead greeted by a goat casually relieving itself near a ceremonial statue of the goddess. The walls are covered in cuneiform inscriptions that haven't been properly maintained in 4 centuries, many of them illegible under layers of soot and grime. The floors are perpetually sticky with spilled beer offerings, and the only scent permeating the air is a nauseating blend of burnt animal sacrifices with undertones of human desperation and poor sanitation. As the newest recruit, you naturally assumed you'd receive training from elegant high priestesses draped in flowing robes, women who moved with mystical grace and spoke in whispered wisdom. Instead, you're immediately placed under the supervision of Ninlil, a wrinkled woman who smells like garlic and crushed dreams. She thrusts a rough broom into your hands and delivers your first lesson in sacred service. The goddess loves a clean floor. This turns out to be ancient Mesopotamian code for your divine calling begins with janitorial duties, and if you're lucky, it might eventually progress to slightly more dignified forms of exploitation. The temple layout itself reflects the haphazard planning that characterizes most religious institutions built over multiple centuries. What you're navigating isn't a holy labyrinth designed for spiritual contemplation, but rather the architectural equivalent of urban sprawl. The building has grown organically since 2000 BCE, with additions, extensions, and modifications added whenever the priesthood acquired more land or resources. One corridor leads to the sacred archives where ancient texts crumble in humid storage rooms. Another pathway winds toward the ritual performance space, where ceremonies happen under leaky roofing. And one passage definitively ends at a deep pit that no one talks about, and you're specifically instructed never to ask about its purpose. The living conditions would make a military barrack seem luxurious by comparison. There are no plush cushions for meditation, No massage tables for spiritual healing. No fountains gurgling with rose-scented water. The only flowing water comes from the sacrificial basin, which hasn't received a thorough cleaning since the reign of Sargon the Great. You're assigned a thin reed mat on a stone floor, sharing space with 3 other girls in various stages of psychological adjustment to their new circumstances. Privacy is a foreign concept here, along with fair compensation, personal boundaries, and basic human dignity. Meals consist of the same monotonous rotation. Lentil stew that's somehow both flavorless and offensive, flatbread with the consistency of roof tiles, and the constant reminder that you're performing this service for Inanna's glory. Of course, everyone understands that you're really here because your parents needed a tax write-off and the temple needed fresh inventory for their sacred services business model. Your spiritual training begins with a comprehensive orientation program that consists entirely of vague metaphors and passive-aggressive instructions delivered through religious hymns. No one hands you a manual, explains workplace policies, or outlines what exactly your duties will entail. You learn through a combination of cryptic hints and trial and error experiences that often end with you being scolded for failing to understand expectations that were never clearly communicated. The priests inform you that your body is now a vessel of the goddess, which sounds profoundly meaningful until you realize its ancient code for community property with questionable maintenance standards. Your training includes learning to walk in perfect circles while balancing a ceramic jug on your head, chanting in languages you don't understand while performing gestures that make you look like you're attempting to signal passing ships, and mastering the art of looking spiritually transcendent while internally calculating how many years you'll be trapped in this situation. The ceremonial dancing proves particularly challenging since you're not a trained performer. You're a teenager with chronic foot blisters from ill-fitting sandals and the natural rhythm of a startled farm animal. Nevertheless, the priests nod approvingly and call your awkward movements beautiful, which you eventually understand is ancient Mesopotamian for adequate enough for our purposes, and also our standards aren't particularly high since we're not paying you anyway. Then comes the elephant in the ziggurat, the economic foundation of your sacred role. The temple operates on what they euphemistically call fertility offerings, but which translates more accurately to prostitution with religious branding. Men from the surrounding community pay tribute to the goddess through your services, and that tribute comes in the form of barley. Not silver, not gold, not even copper, barley. Your sacred sexuality is valued in grain measurements, which gives you a deeply humbling perspective on your place in the cosmic order. When you initially protest or ask questions about these arrangements, you're told that you don't properly understand divine will. If you continue expressing concerns, you're reassigned to cleaning the sacred goat stalls, which are decidedly not metaphorical and smell exactly as terrible as you'd expect. You slowly begin to understand that your entire sacred role is essentially a job description that was too morally questionable to be written down explicitly. The priests maintain plausible deniability by wrapping everything in religious language, but the basic transaction remains unchanged: your body in exchange for agricultural products. The hierarchy within the temple becomes apparent through subtle social cues and explicit power dynamics. The high priestess lives in private chambers with actual furniture, eats meals that include meat and wine, and wears clean linen robes that don't smell like incense smoke and desperation. Senior temple women enjoy slightly better accommodations and occasionally receive gifts from regular clients who appreciate consistent service. Meanwhile, as a newcomer, you sleep on the floor, eat subsistence rations, and gradually learn that advancement in this system depends on your willingness to embrace increasingly degrading aspects of sacred service. The psychological manipulation is expertly crafted. Every humiliating experience is reframed as spiritual growth. Every loss of dignity becomes a lesson in divine submission. Every moment of despair is explained as necessary purification before achieving higher consciousness. The priests have perfected the art of making exploitation feel like enlightenment, ensuring that victims blame themselves for their suffering rather than questioning the system that created it. By the end of your first week, you understand that the Temple of Inanna is not a place of worship. It's a business enterprise that has successfully monetized religious devotion, female sexuality, and family desperation into a profitable operation that benefits everyone except the young women who provide the actual services that keep the entire system functioning. If you thought your temple duties couldn't become more uncomfortable after discovering that your sacred sexuality was valued in barley measurements, prepare yourself for the theatrical component of religious service. Welcome to the world of ritualistic performance art, where your primary job is to look mysteriously divine, while participating in elaborate public ceremonies that combine the worst aspects of community theatre with the humiliation of being auctioned off at market. In theory, these sacred rituals are designed to reconnect humanity with the divine realm, bridging the gap between mortal existence and cosmic forces. In practice, they're carefully choreographed spectacles where your main responsibility is to appear spiritually transcendent while swaying to musical accompaniment that sounds suspiciously like someone rhythmically banging cooking pots in the adjacent courtyard. The disconnect between the theoretical spiritual significance and the actual execution is so vast it could accommodate an entire ziggurat. Let's discuss the ceremonial wardrobe. Each piece apparently designed by someone who has never personally worn clothing, and whose understanding of human anatomy comes entirely from theoretical descriptions. There's the feathered diadem of Inanna, which creates an itching sensation so intense it feels like divine punishment. The sheer ceremonial veil offers the dual benefit of providing zero warmth, while also eliminating any pretense of modesty. And then there's the sacred belt, which is really just rope with delusions of grandeur, designed to make you look spiritually significant, while ensuring that every movement reminds you of your bondage to the temple system. You're expected to wear these outfits with supernatural grace, while simultaneously balancing a ceremonial platter laden with sacred dates, pretending your feet aren't screaming in protest from poorly constructed sandals, and maintaining an expression of mystical serenity. Meanwhile, a priest wearing approximately 20 pounds of decorative beads and sporting the facial expression of someone suffering from cosmic constipation recites poetry to the goddess. This verse typically turns out to be elaborate complaints about grain taxation policies disguised as religious devotion. The fertility rite of spring proves particularly hazardous to both dignity and physical safety. The temple floor is artfully covered with flower petals, which sounds romantically poetic until you attempt to perform graceful movements on what essentially becomes a slippery organic carpet. You slip on a damp rose petal and nearly introduce the concept of gravity to your facial features, while the audience of worshippers, drunks, and overly enthusiastic scribes watches your stumbling performance with varying degrees of religious fervor and entertainment. Your choreographed role requires you to perform slow, sensual circles around a sacred altar while humming melodies that exist only in improvisation because nobody has ever bothered to write them down. This is partly because you're not a trained musician, and partly because the entire performance is designed to look mystically spontaneous rather than rehearsed. You're essentially a dancing body double being paid in agricultural products to perform interpretive movement that represents concepts you don't fully understand for an audience that's not entirely sober. The symbolic gestures you've been taught include masterpieces like the gesture of the blooming womb, which bears an uncanny resemblance to simultaneously shrugging, bowing, and experiencing menstrual cramps. The invocation of fertile abundance looks remarkably similar to someone trying to flag down a passing chariot while suffering from a shoulder injury. These movements are performed with religious solemnity, while the mixed audience of genuine worshippers, intoxicated merchants, and scholarly scribes, taking suspiciously detailed notes, watches your every gesture with an intensity that makes you deeply uncomfortable. During the offering segment of the ceremony, you kneel gracefully while holding up your ceremonial bowl of lentils and chanting sacred words in ancient languages you don't speak fluently. The potential for error is enormous, and mistakes carry consequences. On one memorable occasion, you sneeze mid-incantation and accidentally direct your blessing toward the wrong deity. For the following week, everything in the temple develops a mysterious fish-like odor, and the high priest regards you with the kind of murderous glare typically reserved for people who have personally insulted the ziggurat's drainage system. The audience composition adds another layer of complexity to these performances. You're simultaneously entertaining devout religious believers seeking genuine spiritual connection, wealthy merchants looking for exotic entertainment after successful business transactions, and various local officials who attend these ceremonies because political networking happens everywhere, including religious festivals. Balancing these different expectations while maintaining the pretense of divine communion requires acting skills that would challenge professional performers. Festival season intensifies everything exponentially. What you initially hoped might provide a break from routine temple duties instead becomes the equivalent of a corporate holiday celebration designed by people who believe that public humiliation builds character. These festivals occur with alarming frequency, approximately every 6 days, and transform you from a private religious servant into the starring attraction in elaborate public performances that combine religious theatre with ancient pornography and confused livestock management. During the festival of Inanna's descent, you're required to reenact the goddess's mythological journey to the underworld, which involves symbolically removing 7 layers of clothing while descending 7 temple steps in full view of the assembled community. This performance represents profound spiritual metaphor about death and rebirth, and it's also essentially ancient strip theatre presented as religious education. The crowd cheers enthusiastically. Children are present because this is considered family-friendly religious instruction, and there's inevitably someone selling date beer and roasted locusts like this is the Mesopotamian equivalent of a sporting event. The centerpiece of festival season is the sacred marriage ceremony, where a high-ranking priest, or occasionally the king himself, symbolically mates with you to represent the divine union between Dumuzi and Inanna, ensuring agricultural fertility for the coming season. This ritual takes place in front of the entire community with musical accompaniment, burning incense, and an uncomfortable amount of sustained eye contact with people you'll have to see at the market tomorrow. You're expected to vocalize spiritually appropriate sounds of divine ecstasy while maintaining the awareness that this performance will be analyzed and discussed by the community for months afterward. Following these public performances, the community celebrates with elaborate feasting while you return to your sleeping mat, smelling like burnt frankincense and questionable religious symbolism. The festival participants enjoy wine, roasted meat, and animated conversations about the spiritual significance of what they've just witnessed, while you lie awake, wondering how many more years of this sacred service remain in your future. The gap between the supposed spiritual meaning of these rituals and their practical reality creates a constant state of cognitive dissonance. You're told that every humiliating moment represents divine communion, every loss of dignity symbolizes spiritual purification, and every public exposure demonstrates sacred vulnerability. The priests have developed sophisticated theological explanations for why your degradation serves cosmic purposes, ensuring that questioning the system feels like questioning the gods themselves. But remember, it's all sacred. Every mortifying stumble, every mispronounced ancient word, every goat that wanders into the ceremonial space during processionals, it's all part of the divine mystery. Especially the goat, who has become a regular feature of these performances and seems to enjoy the attention more than anyone else involved. Let's address the elephant in the ziggurat, the hygiene situation. If you thought the ceremonial aspects of temple life were challenging, wait until you discover the daily reality of personal cleanliness in an environment that combines the worst aspects of a medieval dormitory with the sanitary standards of a livestock pen. The temple might be sacred, but it definitely doesn't smell that way. Picture this. You're sharing living space with 50 other people, 3 goats that have unclear residential status, burning incense that never quite masks underlying odors, and a sacrificial fire pit that nobody has bothered to ventilate properly since the original construction. The temperature hovers somewhere between baker's oven and please let me die, creating a scent profile that ancient marketing scrolls would probably describe as odor armpit, with notes of desperation and undertones of livestock. Your official title might be Naditu or Kadishtu, impressive sounding names in Sumerian that roughly translate to sacred servant. But your actual hygiene routine more closely resembles that of someone who's been camping under a pointu bridge for several months. Bathing is theoretically part of your religious duties, mentioned in various temple guidelines about ritual purity. In practice, it involves a cracked ceramic basin that doubles as a washing vessel and possibly a sacred artifact. Nobody's entirely certain. Half a jug of lukewarm river water that's been sitting in clay storage containers for unknown periods, and a scrubbing implement that might be a sponge or might be another ritual object. The theological status of cleaning supplies remains frustratingly unclear. Soap exists in this historical period, technically speaking, but it's manufactured from ash and animal fat, creating a cleansing product that smells like something you'd offer to demons in exchange for them leaving your village alone. The elite priestesses naturally enjoy access to proper bathing facilities, private courtyards with functioning drainage systems, imported oils, rose petals, perfume towels, and attendants with soft hands who understand the concept of gentle touch. Meanwhile, you get a broken clay jar and a judgmental goose that has somehow established residence in the bathing area and watches your entire cleansing process with the kind of critical attention usually reserved for performance evaluations. Hair care presents its own unique challenges. There's oil available for conditioning, but it's shared among 12 women and one scribe who insists it prevents baldness. It doesn't. You comb your hair using what is essentially a carved stick, twist it into something that vaguely resembles ceremonial styling, and hope the gods don't notice the inevitable lice population. Spoiler alert, they notice. There's actually an entire hymn dedicated to divine itching, which suggests this has been an ongoing theological concern for several centuries. Clothing maintenance follows a lunar cycle. Garments are washed approximately once per month, or whenever someone spills wine on them, whichever comes first. Your wardrobe consists of 2 ceremonial tunics, one designated for ritual performances and another for the pretense that you're not in a constant state of existential rash. Both smell permanently of incense smoke, human sweat, and the particular kind of despair that develops when you realize your life has become a series of degrading performances punctuated by inadequate meals. Oral hygiene represents perhaps the greatest challenge to maintaining human dignity. The best-case scenario involves rinsing your mouth with beer, which sounds potentially enjoyable until you realize this beer is flat, warm, and more bread than liquid. There are no toothbrushes, just twigs and prayers, lots of prayers. The dental situation becomes a theological matter when your teeth start causing genuine pain, because suffering is supposedly spiritually purifying, and complaining about physical discomfort suggests insufficient devotion to your sacred calling. The most infuriating aspect of this hygiene situation is that whenever merchants arrive at the temple carrying crushed myrrh or imported perfumes, the high priest immediately purchases these luxury items for sacred anointing purposes. Somehow, you're never the person receiving this sacred anointing. Your role is consistently limited to handing out towels and watching other people enjoy the benefits of proper grooming products. Now let's discuss your clientele. because that's what they are, regardless of the religious terminology used to disguise commercial transactions. When you first arrived at the temple, you probably harbored romantic fantasies about the men who would participate in sacred rituals with you. Perhaps you imagined tragic poet warriors, handsome and eloquent men who would quote religious hymns and weep softly under starlight, individuals who smelled like cedar wood and carried an aura of romantic danger. What you actually encounter is a sweaty grain merchant named Nabu who walks with a limp and suffers from a nervous rash that appears whenever he's socially anxious. His tribute to the goddess consists of 3 handfuls of barley, not even good barley, and a half-eaten fig that he apparently started consuming before realizing it was meant as an offering. You struggle not to cry during this encounter, primarily because tears would be interpreted as a bad omen and might trigger another cleansing ritual involving nettles and public humiliation. The men who frequent the temple aren't mythological heroes or even interesting side characters from epic poems. They're ordinary townspeople with untrimmed fingernails, strong opinions about ox cart maintenance, and personal hygiene standards that make your own situation seem luxurious by comparison. They talk incessantly about mundane topics, breathe loudly through their mouths, and universally believe they're receiving divine blessing through your services, despite smelling like fermented onions and wearing tunics that haven't been properly cleaned since the last lunar eclipse. You quickly develop the ability to categorize problematic clients. There are the ones who ask too many personal questions, treating sacred union like a therapy session. Others ask no questions at all, approaching the experience with the emotional engagement of someone purchasing vegetables at market. Some believe that paying the temple fee transforms them into temporary deities, developing inflated egos that make the experience even more unpleasant. Then there are those who inquire about group discounts. There aren't any, but the priests are apparently considering implementing such pricing structures. The absolute worst category consists of the romantics, men who mistake your professionally required smile for genuine affection and begin leaving you personal tokens. These gifts include cracked beads, amateur poetry carved into sticks, and locks of their hair, unrequested and unwanted. These individuals want emotional connection and possibly love. You want an exit strategy from this entire situation. The disconnect creates uncomfortable dynamics that persist long after the ritual encounters have concluded. Some clients display basic human decency. Others seem genuinely confused about temple geography and keep asking for directions to the exit. A few are simply deeply awkward individuals who approach sacred sexuality with the social skills of frightened livestock. But none of them remotely resemble the romantic figures from mythological stories, and yet each encounter is officially classified as a blessed religious experience. You're expected to provide spiritual benedictions afterward, sometimes while suppressing laughter, sometimes while fighting nausea, but always while maintaining the pretense that divine communion has occurred. The surveillance aspect of temple life adds another layer of psychological pressure to an already degrading situation. The high priest possesses all the personal charisma of a tax collection official and the subtlety of a donkey in heat. He maintains constant observation of your activities, positioned behind beaded curtains, like some ancient version of a reality television producer, crossed with an overly suspicious relative. His eyes never blink. His sandals produce ominous squeaking sounds with every step, and whenever you attempt to relax, he clears his throat in a manner that sounds like he's casting curses. Theoretically, his role involves overseeing ritual purity and ensuring proper religious protocols. In practice, he's conducting comprehensive performance evaluations of your sacred duties, taking detailed notes on scrolls while licking the tip of his reed pen between observations. Yes, you can hear every single lick, and yes, it becomes increasingly disturbing over time. His feedback is consistently unsolicited and covers topics ranging from your posture during offerings to your vocal tone during hymns, and occasionally he critiques the apparent gratitude level of your left hand. The constant scrutiny creates an environment where genuine privacy becomes impossible. Even when you think he's left the temple for the day, you'll discover him lurking behind architectural features, casually eating pomegranate seeds while observing your activities. Like this represents peak entertainment value. Whether this constitutes religious supervision, ritual obligation, or simple nosiness remains unclear, but you learn to perform every task under the assumption that judgmental eyes are watching and taking notes for future reference. The community response to your temple service creates additional social complications, particularly from the wives of men who visit the temple for religious services. These women understand that you're not technically permitted to marry and that your clients are selected by the priesthood rather than personal choice. However, their primary concern is that their husbands keep returning home with post-temple satisfaction and suspiciously strong incense fragrances in their beards. These wives form informal organizations dedicated to making your life as difficult as possible through strategic, glaring, passive-aggressive gossip campaigns and the mysterious disappearance of your ceremonial sandals. Some curse you under their breath in ancient languages you don't recognize. Others develop creative revenge strategies. One carved a miniature figurine resembling you, gave it a cracked foot, and buried it under a manure pile. Another sent her daughter to learn sacred rites specifically to spy on your laundry activities and report back on any evidence of luxurious living. The irony is devastating. Many of these hostile wives previously served in temple roles themselves, back when their knees didn't creak and their husbands brought wine instead of excuses for staying out late. They understand exactly how miserable temple life actually is, which might explain why they resent you so intensely. They remember their own suffering and can't bear watching someone else endure what they escaped. You attempted to befriend one of these women once, offering her a sweet date and kind words. She bit into the fruit, looked directly into your eyes and said, "This tastes like my husband's breath." Now you avoid eye contact with married women for basic safety reasons, understanding that your existence represents everything they fear about their own romantic relationships and economic security. Welcome to temple life, where personal hygiene is theoretical, clients are disappointing, surveillance is constant, and the community views you as a necessary evil that threatens their domestic stability, while providing services their husbands apparently require for spiritual fulfillment. If there's one contradiction that perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of your sacred career, it's the marriage prohibition. Let that sink in for a moment. You can perform intimate sacred rituals with traveling merchants under a full moon. You can whisper ancient hymns into the ears of soldiers who still smell like camel dung. You can anoint visiting dignitaries with sacred oils while they discuss grain prices. But you are absolutely, categorically forbidden from developing an exclusive emotional connection with another human being or, heaven forbid, putting on a wedding veil and building a life with someone you actually care about. This isn't merely a temple guideline or a suggestion from the religious hierarchy. This is divine policy, carved in stone and backed by theological authority. According to the scribes and priests, who definitely don't have any personal financial stake in maintaining this arrangement, your body belongs permanently to the goddess Inanna. She has graciously loaned you to the mortal world for the purposes of fertility rituals and spiritual communion, but this loan comes with strict terms and conditions. You are a living altar, and altars, as everyone knows, do not get married, establish households, or raise goats in suburban farming communities. The irony cuts deep when you consider that you've performed enough marriage ceremonies and fertility blessings to officiate dozens of weddings by now. You understand the religious significance of marital union better than most priests, having participated in symbolic versions of these rituals countless times. You can recite the sacred vows from memory, explain the theological importance of partnership, and guide couples through the spiritual aspects of commitment. But when it comes to actually experiencing these bonds yourself, the answer is a firm and permanent no. That might involve personal happiness, and institutional happiness is not part of your job description. Of course, human emotions don't follow institutional policies, and some temple women do fall in love, secretly, desperately, and usually with guards or junior priests who have enough access to develop genuine relationships. These forbidden connections bloom in stolen moments between ritual duties, whispered conversations during incense preparation, and the kind of meaningful glances that develop when people share the same oppressive environment. But the moment these relationships show signs of becoming serious, the temple administration steps in with all the grace and subtlety of a sledgehammer hitting wet clay. Your lover gets reassigned to a distant province where he'll spend the next several years managing grain storage facilities or supervising goat herding operations in remote locations. You receive additional moon vigils and meditation duties designed to help you reflect on your inappropriate emotional attachments, which is temple code for punishment labor that keeps you too exhausted to maintain relationships. The message is clear. Personal connections threaten your availability for temple services, and availability is the foundation of your economic value. The punishment for violating celibacy clauses doesn't involve dramatic public execution or even physical violence. That would be too merciful and far too quick. Instead, they extend your sacred service indefinitely. You get promoted to senior guide for younger temple women, which sounds like advancement until you realize it's essentially a supervisory position in the incense storage closet, where you're expected to train new recruits while pretending not to hear them cry themselves to sleep. It's management responsibility without management benefits, combined with the knowledge that your original sentence has been extended due to unauthorized emotional behavior. So your future becomes crystal clear. No marriage, no domestic partnership, no cozy suburban existence with a fig tree in the courtyard and 3 half-naked toddlers chasing chickens around the garden. Just the warm, eternal embrace of ritual duty and a goat that keeps eating your ceremonial robes. But hey, at least you're spiritually fulfilled, right? At least you're serving a higher purpose that transcends mundane human desires for companionship, family, and emotional security. The loss of bodily autonomy represents perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of temple life. When you first arrived as a confused 10-year-old still smelling faintly of sheep and childhood innocence, you might have harbored the naive hope that you retained some decision-making authority over what happened to your physical self. That hope was promptly incinerated in the sacred fire, along with your birth name and any illusions about maintaining personal agency. Your body no longer belongs to you in any meaningful sense. It belongs to the temple organization, or to the goddess Inanna, or to the priests who manage daily operations, or to the men who offer goats, grain, or suspiciously damp silver coins in exchange for services. The exact chain of ownership remains somewhat murky, but one thing is absolutely clear. You are not at the top of this hierarchy. You're not even in the middle. You're the property being managed, not the person making management decisions. The priests refer to you as a vessel, which sounds beautifully poetic in religious hymns, until you realize they mean it in the most literal sense possible. You are a container, preferably empty of personal desires, individual preferences, and inconvenient emotions. It's much easier to manage temple operations when the human resources don't have opinions about their working conditions or suggestions for policy improvements. There's a ceremony for everything in temple life, and you are consistently the centerpiece rather than a participant. Did you think you'd have input into your daily schedule? How delightfully naive. Your job is to smile serenely, undress gracefully according to ritual requirements, and pretend this is all a deeply meaningful spiritual experience, rather than an awkward commercial appointment that's running 10 minutes behind schedule because the previous client couldn't find the exit. Even when you're not performing active duties, your time remains heavily regulated. Don't bathe at certain times because the water has been blessed for other purposes. Don't cut your hair except during the annual ritual shearing that makes you look like livestock receiving seasonal grooming. Don't eat specific foods that might interfere with your spiritual purity, though nobody explains exactly how lentils achieve spiritual interference. Don't speak unless directly addressed, because unsolicited conversation suggests dangerous independent thinking. Don't run anywhere, because that appears ungraceful and undignified. Don't laugh too loudly because excessive joy is somehow unholy. Don't cry visibly because emotional displays are inconvenient for everyone involved. It's not just your physical body that no longer belongs to you. It's your time, your voice, your breath, your facial expressions, and your emotional responses. Every aspect of your existence has been converted into temple property managed by people who measure devotion in barley quantities and silver measurements. But don't worry, the temple scribes did compose a commemorative hymn in your honor once. It even rhymed, sort of. Let's address the economic aspects of your sacred career, or rather, the complete absence of anything resembling fair compensation. Being a temple prostitute, being a holy servant of divine union sounds like the kind of prestigious position that should come with substantial perks. At minimum, you'd expect steady income, job security, and perhaps premium seating at religious festivals. Instead, you're paid primarily in vibes and theoretical spiritual benefits. Technically, you receive compensation in the form of barley, dates, and the occasional goat, but these are classified as symbolic offerings rather than wages. More importantly, these tributes don't actually go to you personally. They're deposited directly into the temple treasury, which is managed by a priest whose interpretation of wealth redistribution involves occasionally allowing you to lick the honey bowl after he's finished with it. Think of it as trickle-down economics, ancient Mesopotamian style, where the trickle barely qualifies as moisture. Your actual benefits package consists of meals, thin lentil stew, and bread hard enough to use as construction materials, plus a sleeping mat on a stone floor. If you're exceptionally fortunate, someone might give you a linen scrap that previously belonged to a nobleman's tunic, now repurposed as your ritual garment. It's sustainable fashion before sustainability was fashionable, except the sustainability involves reusing other people's discarded clothing while your labor generates profits for religious institutions. You once made the mistake of inquiring about actual monetary wages. The high priest responded with an elaborate speech about divine compensation and how Inanna blesses you in ways that earthly currency could never match. Then he walked away while jingling a pouch of very real, very earthly silver that definitely wasn't metaphorical or spiritual in nature. The sound of those coins became a daily reminder that someone was profiting from your services and that someone was not you. Some temple women attempt to supplement their income through side businesses, weaving, brewing, reading omens in animal organs for bored merchants who enjoy exotic fortune-telling services. But if the priests discover these entrepreneurial activities, you get demoted to candle wick scraping duty, which is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds and smells considerably worse. The position involves removing hardened wax from religious candles using small metal tools while breathing fumes that make you question whether this qualifies as cruel and unusual punishment. So you continue performing your sacred duties with a professionally painted smile and a stomach that has made peace with intermittent fasting as a permanent lifestyle choice. When your sandals break from overuse, you repair them with twine and hope the goddess appreciates rustic humility as a fashion statement. When winter arrives and your thin ceremonial robes provide inadequate warmth, you remind yourself that suffering builds spiritual character, at least according to the priests who sleep in heated chambers. Some women fantasize about escaping temple life through marriage to wealthy merchants or successful farmers, but the reality is economically problematic. Any man rich enough to support you financially has probably already visited the temple for services. If he didn't propose marriage before seeing you chant while minimally clothed under moonlight, he's probably not planning to offer domestic partnership afterward. The customer service provider relationship rarely evolves into romantic commitment, especially when the service involves religious obligations and community oversight. The psychological toll of this perpetual servitude accumulates slowly, like sediment building up in a river delta. Each day of powerlessness deposits another layer of resignation, another acceptance of circumstances beyond your control, another small death of hope for something different. You learn to measure time not in days or seasons, but in years of service remaining, assuming you survive long enough to reach whatever constitutes retirement in this system. The most insidious aspect is how the exploitation is framed as privilege. Every restriction on your freedom is presented as spiritual protection. Every loss of autonomy becomes evidence of your special relationship with the divine. Every moment of suffering is reinterpreted as purification necessary for achieving higher consciousness. The priests have perfected a theological framework that makes victims grateful for their victimization, ensuring that questioning the system feels like questioning the gods themselves. You begin to understand that survival requires developing a psychological split between your public performance and your private self. The smiling, graceful, spiritually transcendent temple servant becomes a character you play, while some small, hidden part of your actual personality retreats deep inside where the priests cannot reach it. This internal refugee becomes your secret, the one thing that remains truly yours in a life where everything else belongs to other people. But even this private self faces constant pressure. How long can you maintain an authentic identity when every day requires you to perform submission, gratitude, and spiritual fulfillment? How many years of saying thank you for degrading experiences before you start believing you should actually be grateful? The line between performance and reality begins to blur when performance becomes your entire reality. And yet, somehow, you endure. Not because the system is tolerable, but because the alternative, the river trial, exile, or death, is worse. You endure because other women have endured before you, and because somewhere in your hidden self, you maintain the stubborn belief that this cannot last forever, even when forever feels like exactly how long it will continue. You might assume that sharing the same goddess, enduring identical rituals, and wearing the same uncomfortable linen wraps that never fit properly after washing would create natural solidarity among temple women. After all, you're all bound by the same religious obligations, subject to the same priestly oversight, and united in the common experience of having your personal autonomy sold to finance your family's economic problems. Unfortunately, the real eternal flame burning in this temple isn't divine love or spiritual enlightenment. It's gossip, fueled by equal parts, jealousy, boredom, and whatever wine the scribes forgot to secure in the storage rooms. The eldest temple sister, who hasn't personally performed a ritual in several years but still parades around like she invented sacred intimacy, serves as the unofficial information coordinator for all temple drama. She'll whisper to anyone within earshot that you were specifically chosen for last week's fertility rite, not because of your spiritual aura or divine connection, but because the high priest has developed a peculiar preference for women with crooked toes. Meanwhile, Ki, the wide-eyed recent initiate, who somehow maintains optimism despite overwhelming evidence that optimism is inappropriate here, keeps accidentally bumping into you during morning incense preparation, just to ask probing questions. Is it true you cried during the spring rite in front of those merchants from Kish? She inquires with the kind of innocent curiosity that masks calculated social intelligence. No, Ki. That was smoke irritation from poorly ventilated incense burners. You respond through gritted teeth, adding silently, and yes, I hope your next divine cleansing ritual includes extra nettles and extended public humiliation. The architectural reality of temple life makes privacy absolutely impossible. The sacred chamber walls possess all the sound-dampening qualities of papyrus, which means your most private moments become community entertainment. You think you're having a quiet moment of personal reflection, or perhaps discreetly enjoying a honey fig that someone left as an offering, when suddenly everyone knows about your unauthorized snacking. By mid-afternoon, the story transforms into accusations that you seduced a merchant for his figs. By evening, the fig has mysteriously transformed into a gold ring, and by moonrise, someone will be composing a hymn about your alleged material corruption. The unofficial ranking system among temple women creates constant competitive tension. Who attracts the most devoted clients? Who received silver jewelry as tribute? Who has been noticed favorably by the high priest's cousin's uncle's administrative assistant? They say comparison is the thief of joy, but in temple life, comparison is the entertainment. It's the primary recreational activity in an environment where actual recreation doesn't exist. The art form that truly flourishes here is passive-aggressive blessing. May Inanna grant you the stamina to manage all that attention. One sister smiles sweetly while watching you struggle with an unusually demanding ritual schedule. May your next ceremony proceed more smoothly than your last. Another chimes in helpfully, which would sound supportive if she hadn't been lurking behind a pillar during that previous ceremony, snickering into her prayer beads while you stumbled through unfamiliar chants. The religious hierarchy ensures that silence remains officially sacred, but gossip has achieved divine status as the temple's primary form of social bonding and entertainment. In this environment, your reputation can be destroyed by something as minor as sighing audibly during evening prayers or appearing insufficiently grateful while eating lentil porridge for the 1,000th consecutive meal. Speaking of divine justice, let's discuss the river trial, Mesopotamia's favorite method of conflict resolution that combines religious theater with summary execution. Did you offend a priest by questioning temple policies? Accidentally break a sacred vessel during your cleaning duties? Whisper that the god statue's expression suggests chronic digestive problems? Congratulations, you've earned yourself a theological performance review with a strong current and significant drowning potential. Here's how this ancient legal system operates. You're ceremonially escorted by a group of smirking elders, and at least one man carrying an intimidatingly large stick down to the banks of the Euphrates. There, you receive ritual binding, because swimming freely would constitute cheating, followed by a brief prayer that translates roughly to, "May the gods show mercy," or whatever. Then you're tossed into the river like yesterday's grain offering. If you manage to float or swim to safety despite being bound, this proves the gods approve of your innocence. You might even receive a promotion, assuming you survive the experience without permanent lung damage. If you sink or become crocodile food, your guilt is confirmed posthumously, which is remarkably unhelpful for your future career prospects, but very satisfying for the people who accused you. Being a temple prostitute doesn't provide many legal rights, but you do qualify for premium river trial services. Your testing might include more elaborate pre-drowning blessings, which don't improve your survival chances, but do make your potential death feel more festive. Occasionally, they even allow your regular clients to observe the proceedings, transforming your theological trial into divine reality entertainment. Here's the fundamental problem with this justice system. Everyone wants to believe the gods will intervene on behalf of the innocent. Even you start hoping for miraculous divine rescue, right up until you realize that the man tying your wrists is the same person who accused you of insufficient piety after you rolled your eyes during his off-key chanting. Spoiler alert, the gods rarely intervened in these situations. Divine intervention, it turns out, has a remarkably poor track record when it comes to preventing judicial drowning. Those who survived the river trial returned to temple life soaking wet, half dead, and now officially classified as untouchable, which in religious terminology meant they could sweep courtyards and maintain inventory records, but were permanently banned from handling sacred bread or participating in ritual activities, which was probably acceptable, considering the bread was stale anyway, and ritual participation had never been particularly enjoyable. So you've somehow survived decades of incense, smoke inhalation, fertility ritual performances, river trial theology, and passive-aggressive prayer warfare. Your hips creak like poorly maintained ziggurats. Your back has been bent in ceremonial positions more frequently than sacrificial livestock, and your youthful allure now inspires more sympathy than divine favor. Surely now, at the twilight of your illustrious temple career, you get to rest, relax, perhaps sip pomegranate wine under the shade of a fig tree, while telling scandalous stories to wide-eyed initiates about the good old days when temple life was merely terrible instead of soul-crushing. Absolutely not. Welcome to retirement, Mesopotamian style, where the golden years are neither golden nor particularly restful. You don't receive a pension, a retirement party, or even a commemorative clay tablet acknowledging your decades of service. Instead, you get promoted to weaver, herbalist, or, if the gods really want to demonstrate their sense of humor, full-time celibate caretaker of the sacred goats. You become what the scribes euphemistically call a naditu, which translates to cloistered temple woman devoted to the gods and to never experiencing personal joy again. Your retirement accommodations consist of a cell, and not a cozy monk's cell with rustic charm and pastoral views. This is a room containing a sleeping mat, an oil lamp, and the lingering aromatic essence of cumin mixed with existential dread. You're expected to weave cloth for temple use, copy sacred hymns by hand until your fingers develop permanent cramps, and generally remain invisible unless your advice is specifically requested, which it never, island. You don't have children to visit you during your declining years. You don't have a husband to provide companionship and support. You don't even have former lovers sending occasional gifts or fond remembrances, because apparently, once your sacred duties expire, so does your fan base. The men who once praised your spiritual services while leaving barley offerings now pretend not to recognize you in the marketplace, as if acknowledging your existence might remind their wives about their previous religious devotions. The younger temple women now regard you as a living cautionary tale, whispering questions about your legendary career. Did she really serve Inanna for 40 years? Why does she mutter about fig theft in her sleep? Didn't she once bite a priest? The answers are yes, and technically yes, though he definitely deserved it after that comment about your chanting posture. But there's one unexpected benefit to this monastic retirement. You finally experience a tiny taste of peace. No more awkward rituals with sweaty merchants who smell like livestock and disappointment. No more competitive rivalries over who receives the most gold-plated amulets from grateful clients. And best of all, nobody expects you to smile graciously through another fertility chant while pretending that standing naked in cold temple courtyards represents the pinnacle of spiritual fulfillment. You sit in your corner cell, humming ancient hymns that you actually remember fondly now that you're not required to perform them, and thinking, at least I'm not in the river, because ultimately, surviving becomes its own reward in a system designed to consume people. You made it through decades of exploitation, degradation, and institutional abuse, and you're still breathing, still thinking, still capable of appreciating small moments of silence. The divine reward for a lifetime of temple service, it turns out, isn't treasure or comfort or recognition. It's simply the fact that you survived when many others didn't. You're alive to tell the story. Even if the only audience consists of sacred goats who judge your storytelling skills but don't interrupt with theological corrections. In the end, that might be the closest thing to victory available in a system that was never designed for your benefit. You endured, you remember, and somewhere in your weathered hands and tired eyes lies the truth about what really happened in those sacred chambers. A truth that will die with you, but a truth that you carry nonetheless. Now, Let's journey from the dusty temples of ancient Mesopotamia to the opulent dining halls of imperial China, where food transcended mere sustenance to become a complex language of power, medicine, and cosmic harmony. If you thought the Mesopotamian temple system was elaborate in its ritualistic manipulation, wait until you discover how Chinese emperors transformed eating into a philosophical statement about their divine right to rule the known world. In ancient China, food was never just food. Every grain of rice, every slice of meat, every sip of tea carried profound meaning that extended far beyond nutrition. To dine was to participate in the fundamental balance of the universe itself. Each dish served on the emperor's table represented a carefully calculated decision involving medicine, politics, astronomy, and theology. When a Chinese emperor ate, he wasn't simply satisfying hunger, he was demonstrating his harmony with cosmic forces and his worthiness to govern everything under heaven. The guiding principle behind imperial cuisine was yin and yang, those opposing yet complementary forces that, when properly balanced, maintained both bodily health and imperial stability. This wasn't merely philosophical theory applied to cooking. It was a sophisticated system where every ingredient possessed specific thermal and spiritual properties that could affect not only physical health, but also political fortune. Cold ingredients like cucumber, mung beans, and certain fish were believed to cool fiery temperaments and reduce internal heat that might lead to poor decision-making or violent impulses. Warming foods like ginger, lamb, cinnamon, and strong wine were thought to stoke the body's inner furnace, providing energy and vitality necessary for commanding armies and governing vast territories. An emperor's chef required training that went far beyond culinary technique. These men, and they were exclusively men in the imperial kitchens, needed comprehensive knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine, understanding how different foods affected the body's qi, blood circulation, and spiritual energy. They studied the properties of hundreds of ingredients, learning which combinations would strengthen the emperor's liver function, improve his mental clarity, boost his sexual vitality, or enhance his ability to make wise political decisions. An imperial banquet wasn't simply a meal. It was a complex medical prescription designed to optimize the ruler's physical and mental performance. The seasonal aspect of this culinary philosophy added another layer of complexity. Spring menus emphasized foods that would help the emperor's body emerge from winter's dormancy, fresh vegetables, young shoots, and ingredients that promoted growth and renewal. Summer dining focused on cooling foods that would prevent overheating and maintain emotional stability during the intense agricultural season. Autumn meals featured ingredients that would help consolidate energy and prepare for winter's challenges, while winter banquets concentrated on warming, strengthening foods that would sustain the emperor through the coldest months. But food also functioned as political theatre on an unprecedented scale. Every exotic ingredient served at the imperial table represented a demonstration of the emperor's reach and authority. To feast on delicacies from distant provinces or tributary states was to display, quite literally, that the emperor's power extended to the furthest corners of the known world. When bird's nest soup appeared on the royal menu, it wasn't just about the supposed health benefits of consuming solidified swiftlet saliva. It was proof that the emperor commanded expeditions to dangerous Southeast Asian cliffs and controlled trade routes that could deliver such rarities to the Forbidden City. Serving shark fin soup demonstrated mastery over the oceans themselves. Bear paw stew proved that the emperor's hunters could defeat the fiercest predators in the deepest forests. Camel hump roasts showed dominion over the vast desert regions of Central Asia. Each dish was an edible map of imperial conquest, a dinner plate decorated with the emperor's political achievements. Foreign envoys dining at the imperial table weren't just being fed, they were receiving a comprehensive demonstration of Chinese power disguised as hospitality. The complexity of imperial food preparation rivaled modern pharmaceutical manufacturing. Imperial kitchens employed hundreds of specialists, each responsible for specific aspects of culinary production. There were masters of soup preparation, experts in meat roasting, specialists in vegetable cutting techniques, and even officials whose sole responsibility was determining the precise timing for serving different courses. Separate kitchens handled breakfast, lunch, and dinner preparations, ensuring that each meal received dedicated attention from teams of professionals. Quality control in imperial kitchens operated with the precision of military intelligence. Every ingredient underwent multiple inspections before being approved for imperial consumption. Tasting officials were assigned to sample every dish before it reached the emperor's lips, not only to detect potential poisoning but also to ensure that flavor, temperature, and presentation met the impossibly high standards expected for divine dining. These food tasters held positions of enormous responsibility. A single mistake could mean not only their own execution, but also the disgrace of their entire family lineage. The emperor's dining schedule itself reflected cosmic principles. Meals were timed according to astronomical observations, with certain foods served only during specific lunar phases or seasonal transitions. The most precious delicacies appeared exclusively during important state occasions, the reception of foreign ambassadors, celebrations of military victories, or ceremonies marking the crown prince's education milestones. The rarity and expense of these ingredients made their consumption a political statement about the empire's prosperity and the emperor's divine favor. The theological aspect of imperial dining cannot be overstated. Before every significant meal, elaborate offerings were presented to ancestors and celestial deities. The emperor's food was considered sacred, blessed by heaven itself, and sharing it with guests represented a form of divine communion. To be invited to dine with the emperor meant receiving not just nourishment but also spiritual elevation. Refusing an invitation to the imperial table was essentially rejecting the emperor's divinity, a dangerous insult that could have serious political consequences. The etiquette surrounding imperial dining resembled elaborate choreography. Officials never began eating until the emperor lifted his chopsticks, and they were required to mirror his pace throughout the meal, careful never to finish a dish before he did, or to appear more enthusiastic about the food than their ruler. Servants moved through the dining hall like silent shadows, replenishing teacups and removing empty plates with movements so practiced they seemed almost supernatural. Every gesture reinforced the hierarchy that placed the emperor at the center of both earthly and cosmic order. The medicinal beliefs surrounding imperial cuisine reached levels of sophistication that bordered on obsession. Certain dishes were believed to extend life, enhance wisdom, improve sexual performance, or grant protection from diseases and evil spirits. The emperor's food wasn't just fuel for his body, it was medicine for his soul, protection for his reign, and insurance for his dynasty's continuation. Royal physicians worked closely with imperial chefs to design menus that would address the emperor's specific health concerns while also maintaining the symbolic power necessary for effective governance. Regional specialties from across the vast Chinese empire appeared on imperial tables as both culinary treats and political statements. A dish featuring ingredients from Sichuan province demonstrated the emperor's control over that distant region. Seafood from Guangdong showed his authority over southern coastal areas. Desert delicacies from Xinjiang proved his dominion over the western frontiers. Each meal became a gastronomic tour of imperial territory, reinforcing the message that all roads led to the Forbidden City and all resources flowed toward the Dragon Throne. The contrast between imperial dining and common food consumption was deliberately stark. While emperors feasted on bird's nest soup and bear paw stew, ordinary Chinese citizens survived on rice, millet, vegetables, and occasional bits of pork or fish. This disparity wasn't accidental. It was carefully maintained to reinforce social hierarchy and political authority. The emperor ate like a god precisely so that everyone else would remember the vast gulf between divine authority and mortal existence. The legacy of this culinary philosophy extended far beyond individual meals or specific dynasties. The principles that governed imperial Chinese dining, food as medicine, eating as political statement, and cuisine as cosmic harmony, influenced Chinese culture for thousands of years and continue to shape attitudes toward food, health, and social relationships in Chinese communities worldwide. Every time someone discusses the warming or cooling properties of different foods, every time a banquet is used to demonstrate wealth or respect, every time food is considered medicine, echoes of imperial Chinese culinary philosophy resonate across the centuries. To understand imperial Chinese cuisine is to glimpse a civilization that elevated cooking to the level of statecraft, where every meal was simultaneously a medical treatment, a political demonstration, and a religious ceremony, all served on porcelain plates worth more than most people's annual income. Of all the strange and treasured foods that graced the tables of Chinese emperors, few delicacies commanded more reverence, expense, and sheer logistical madness than bird's nest soup. This wasn't a rustic dish made from twigs, leaves, and good intentions. This was a culinary creation born from the hardened saliva of swiftlets, small birds that built their nests in the most inaccessible caves along the treacherous coasts of Southeast Asia. To harvest these nests, workers risked their lives climbing sheer cliff faces or dangling from rope systems in pitch-black caverns, scraping delicate structures from rock walls while bats shrieked overhead and the ocean crashed hundreds of feet below. Each nest represented a prize more fragile than glass and worth its weight in silver. The harvesting process alone bordered on the supernatural. Professional nest collectors, known as bird's nest men, developed skills that would make modern rock climbers weep with envy. They scaled vertical limestone walls using bamboo ladders and primitive rope systems, working by torchlight in caves so deep that daylight never penetrated their depths. One slip meant certain death, but the potential rewards justified the risk. A single high-quality nest could feed a family for months, while a successful harvesting expedition could establish a merchant's fortune for generations. To the Chinese imperial court, bird's nest soup represented far more than a culinary curiosity. It was medicine, luxury, and divine blessing combined into one translucent bowl. Traditional Chinese physicians praised it for strengthening lung function, replenishing vital qi energy, improving digestion, enhancing beauty, soothing persistent coughs, maintaining youthful skin, and extending longevity. To sip this delicate broth wasn't merely eating, it was consuming health, vitality, and prestige in liquid form. No wonder emperors demanded it for state banquets and nobles hoarded it as proof of their superior status and cosmic favor. The preparation process itself required meticulous attention that bordered on religious devotion. Nests had to be soaked for hours to soften their concrete-like texture, then painstakingly cleaned of feathers, debris, and whatever unfortunate insects had become trapped in the solidified bird saliva. What remained after this tedious process was a translucent, jelly-like substance that, when simmered carefully with the finest spring water, produced a broth with an almost ethereal texture. Subtle, slightly sweet, but most importantly, impossibly rare. Bird's nest soup wasn't designed to overwhelm the palate with bold flavors. Instead, it whispered its worth through purity and refinement, a dish that spoke in understated elegance rather than shouting its value. This delicacy also carried enormous political significance. Tributary states in what is now Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines were expected to provide birds' nests as part of their offerings to the Chinese court. To present such treasures was to acknowledge the emperor's supremacy over distant lands and treacherous waters. In return, the emperor, by serving bird's nest soup at imperial banquets, displayed the vast reach of his empire's influence and the devotion of subject peoples. Every spoonful reinforced the cosmic order that placed the Middle Kingdom at the center of civilized existence. Of course, the average rice farmer in Hunan or fisherman in Fujian never even smelled bird's nest soup, let alone tasted it. This was food exclusively for emperors, imperial concubines, and the highest-ranking mandarins. For ordinary people, it remained a distant legend whispered about in markets, but never experienced. The exclusivity was precisely the point. Bird's nest soup existed to demonstrate the unbridgeable gap between divine rulers and mortal subjects. But if you thought consuming bird saliva was the pinnacle of imperial dining extravagance, consider the imperial Chinese approach to silkworms. When most people think of these creatures, they envision shimmering silk robes and elegant tapestries, not dinner plates. However, in ancient China, nothing went to waste, especially not the plump pupae left behind after silk harvesting. Once the delicate threads were extracted for weaving imperial garments, these protein-rich creatures found their way into the emperor's kitchen, transformed from industrial byproduct into prestigious delicacy. To outsiders, consuming insects might sound revolting, but in Chinese imperial cuisine, it represented practical wisdom, symbolic significance, and surprising prestige. Silkworm pupae were considered highly nutritious, packed with protein, healthy fats, and essential minerals that traditional medicine viewed as concentrated sources of life energy. Imperial physicians believed they could tonify blood, improve skin quality, and balance the body's internal energies. Emperors and nobles consumed them not merely as exotic curiosities, but as supplements designed to fortify strength and preserve vitality in a culture where food and medicine were inseparable. Preparation methods varied according to seasonal availability and imperial preference. Sometimes the pupae were roasted until they achieved a satisfying crispness. Other times they were boiled and seasoned with soy sauce or rare spices imported from Central Asian trading posts. The texture was distinctively chewy, the flavor nutty and earthy with subtle sweetness that varied depending on preparation technique. This wasn't a delicacy engineered to seduce through flavor alone, but rather through the philosophical concept that consuming silkworms allowed one to absorb the same transformative energy that converted humble mulberry leaves into the finest silk threads. The symbolism underlying this practice added profound meaning to what might otherwise seem like opportunistic insect consumption. Silk itself represented the fabric of imperial authority, the material that clothed emperors, Buddhist monks, and diplomatic envoys traveling to distant kingdoms. To consume the creatures responsible for producing this luxury was in essence to ingest imperial power itself. Imagine hosting a state banquet where guests wore silk gowns while dining on dishes made from the very organisms that created their clothing. It was simultaneously decadent and poetic, a reminder that even insects could be transformed into symbols of status when processed by imperial kitchens. Naturally, silkworm pupae weren't available to common citizens. These delicacies were expensive, directly tied to the silk industry's production cycles, and therefore appeared almost exclusively on elite tables. For peasants, silkworm pupae remained stories told rather than foods tasted. But for the imperial court, they bridged the worlds of fashion, medicine, and cuisine in a single crunchy bite, representing the Chinese genius for finding practical uses for every available resource. If bird's nest soup symbolized heavenly blessings and silkworm pupae represented transformation, then shark fin soup embodied raw dominance over the natural world. Few dishes in Chinese culinary history proclaimed power and extravagance quite like this oceanic delicacy. To modern sensibilities, it may seem like questionable cuisine, but for centuries, shark fin soup crowned imperial banquets as the ultimate expression of wealth, sophistication, and mastery over distant seas. The fins themselves were prized not for their flavor, which was virtually non-existent, but for their distinctive texture, After hours of careful simmering in rich broths, shark fins developed a slippery, gelatinous consistency that Chinese gourmands described as luxuriously satisfying. Master chefs enhanced this bland foundation with broths flavored with chicken, ham, or abalone, creating dishes that felt opulent in the mouth rather than exciting to the palate. Consuming shark fin soup wasn't about satisfying hunger or even enjoying taste. It was performing refinement through the physical act of lifting porcelain spoons filled with oceanic conquest. Traditional Chinese medicine attributed numerous health benefits to shark fin consumption. Imperial physicians claimed these fins could boost energy levels, improve kidney function, enhance male vitality, and even extend life expectancy. Whether these effects possessed any scientific validity mattered less than their symbolic importance. Serving shark fin soup at state banquets represented offering bottled strength and longevity to honored guests, a culinary blessing of power and endurance. For emperors, this made the delicacy even more valuable. A ruler who consumed shark fin demonstrated not only wealth, but also divine stamina, necessary for governing vast territories. The logistics of acquiring shark fins elevated this dish far beyond mere exotic cuisine. Fishing fleets had to brave dangerous waters, hunt massive marine predators, and carefully preserve fins during long voyages back to Chinese ports. Every spoonful carried the labor of entire maritime expeditions, the courage of fishermen who faced oceanic monsters, and the expertise of traders who could transport perishable goods across vast distances. To present shark fin soup at imperial tables was to proclaim mastery over remote waters and absolute control over the men who sailed them. For ordinary Chinese citizens, shark fin soup existed purely in mythology. Stories whispered about imperial excess that common people would never witness, let alone taste. It wasn't intended for mass consumption, but rather for emperors, high officials, and honored foreign dignitaries. To be offered shark fin soup was to be elevated temporarily into the orbit of imperial privilege, a culinary honor that marked recipients as worthy of extraordinary respect. But the imperial kitchen's creativity didn't stop with aquatic delicacies. Chinese emperors pushed the boundaries of exotic consumption into territories that would challenge even modern adventurous diners. Camel humps, for instance, weren't simply unusual protein sources, they were edible trophies of conquest over Central Asian deserts. To most people, camels represented beasts of burden trudging along Silk Road trade routes. But to emperors, their fatty humps were prized cuts that demonstrated imperial reach into the harshest environments on Earth. Bear paws represented an even more dramatic statement of power over nature. Acquiring these delicacies required slaying creatures that were both respected and feared throughout Chinese territories. Braised bear paw was considered an aphrodisiac, a restorative tonic, and a dish suitable only for rulers and legendary heroes. The preparation process required days of careful cleaning and slow simmering to soften tough flesh into edible tenderness. To serve bear paw at imperial banquets proclaimed a simple message. Our empire is so mighty that even the fiercest predators end up on our plates. Perhaps the most shocking delicacy from the imperial Chinese menu was leopard fetus stew, a dish that sounds appalling to modern sensibilities, but made perfect sense within traditional Chinese medical philosophy. This extreme delicacy was believed to invigorate the body with yang energy, providing strength and vitality that could only come from consuming life force in its most concentrated form. Deer antler broth served similar purposes, appearing regularly at court dinners as both medicine and symbol of imperial power over wild creatures. These exotic meats weren't simply about demonstrating wealth or shocking foreign visitors. They fed into sophisticated beliefs about consuming strength to inherit it, absorbing the essential qualities of powerful animals through careful preparation and ritualistic consumption. The emperor who dined on bear paw wasn't just eating unusual protein. He was symbolically incorporating the bear's strength, courage, and dominance into his own imperial essence. The preparation of these extreme delicacies required master chefs with specialized knowledge of both culinary techniques and traditional medicine. They needed to understand not only how to make tough animal parts palatable, but also how to preserve and enhance their supposed medicinal properties. Imperial kitchens employed experts who devoted their entire careers to perfecting the cooking methods for specific exotic ingredients, ensuring that every dish served to the emperor represented the pinnacle of both culinary art and therapeutic effectiveness. The symbolic power of these extreme delicacies extended far beyond their nutritional or medicinal value. When foreign ambassadors witnessed Chinese emperors casually consuming bear paws, camel humps, and leopard fetus stew, they understood they were observing a ruler who commanded resources and territories that extended to the furthest corners of the known world. These meals became diplomatic statements more powerful than treaties, demonstrating imperial reach through the simple act of eating creatures that most people would never encounter. So when a platter of camel hump or a steaming bear paw arrived at the emperor's table, it represented far more than exotic cuisine. It was theatre, conquest, cosmic legitimacy, and medical treatment all served simultaneously on golden dishes, proving that Chinese imperial dining transformed mere eating into performance art that proclaimed divine authority over every living creature under heaven. No imperial banquet in ancient China was complete without beverages that could transform simple drinking into profound statements about civilization, refinement, and cosmic harmony. While the exotic delicacies we've discussed certainly impressed guests and demonstrated imperial wealth, the true artistry of Chinese court dining often resided in what filled the cups. Tea and wine weren't merely beverages designed to quench thirst or complement food. They represented philosophy, medicine, and diplomacy poured into porcelain vessels worth more than most people's annual income. Tea began its journey to imperial prominence as a humble medicinal brew made from bitter leaves, typically consumed by monks seeking mental clarity and hermits pursuing spiritual enlightenment. By the Tang dynasty, however, this simple drink had blossomed into a refined cultural practice that embodied everything Chinese civilization valued about restraint, wisdom, and harmony with natural forces. The emperor's tea service bore no resemblance to the casual leaf steeping that common people enjoyed. Imperial tea was powdered with precision, whisked to perfection, and presented with ceremonial gravity that rivaled religious rituals. The quality of water used for imperial tea brewing became a subject of passionate debate among court scholars and tea masters. Spring water from hidden mountain streams was considered the purest option, worthy of offering to both heaven and emperor. Some tea masters insisted that water from specific sacred springs possessed unique mineral compositions that enhanced both flavor and spiritual properties. Others argued that rainwater collected during particular lunar phases achieved superior purity. Imperial tea servants traveled hundreds of miles to acquire water that met these impossibly high standards, transforming simple hydration into logistical expeditions. Tea service in the imperial court symbolized clarity, restraint, and the Confucian virtues that supposedly guided enlightened governance. A properly conducted tea ceremony demonstrated the emperor's mental discipline, his appreciation for subtle pleasures, and his ability to find profound meaning in simple actions. When foreign ambassadors were invited to share tea with the emperor, they participated in a ritual that simultaneously honored their diplomatic status while reminding them of Chinese cultural sophistication. The ability to appreciate tea's subtle flavors supposedly indicated refinement of character and worthiness for serious political discussion. Wine, by contrast, represented controlled indulgence and the calculated loosening of social restraints that could facilitate both honest conversation and political manipulation. Ancient Chinese wine was typically produced from millet, rice, or sorghum, often achieving sweetness and strength that could rapidly alter both mood and judgment. Imperial banquets featured elaborate drinking games, poetry contests, and musical performances that accompanied flowing cups of warm wine, creating an atmosphere where scholars recited spontaneous verses, generals boasted about military victories, and the emperor presided over the controlled chaos of his intoxicated officials. But wine service involved far more than recreational drinking. It functioned as crucial religious ritual, particularly during ancestral ceremonies and imperial sacrifices. Before major offerings to ancestors or seasonal ceremonies at the Temple of Heaven, elaborate cups of wine were poured as libations, symbolizing respect for deceased family members and continuity between the living and divine realms. The emperor himself performed these wine ceremonies during state sacrifices, demonstrating his role as intermediary between earthly governance and celestial authority. The etiquette surrounding imperial drinking could determine political careers and diplomatic relationships. Toasting the emperor required specific choreography, bowing deeply, raising cups with both hands, and draining wine in a single continuous motion to demonstrate loyalty and respect. At large state banquets, elaborate sequences of toasts structured entire evenings, with each round reinforcing social hierarchy and political alliances through carefully orchestrated drinking protocols. Refusing wine offered by the emperor could signal dangerous disrespect or suggest suspicious sobriety that might indicate plotting against imperial authority. Many court officials staggered home from these mandatory festivities, less from celebration than from professional obligation. The emperor's wine was not optional recreation. It was political participation disguised as hospitality. Smart courtiers learned to manage their alcohol consumption strategically, appearing appropriately appreciative, without becoming so intoxicated that they revealed embarrassing opinions or made career-damaging statements about imperial policies. The medicinal aspects of imperial beverage service added another layer of complexity to what might otherwise seem like simple refreshment. Tea was praised for cleansing internal organs, aiding digestion, calming nervous energy, and promoting mental clarity necessary for wise decision-making. Wine was believed to invigorate blood circulation, ward off cold diseases, and provide courage needed for difficult political decisions. Together, these beverages embodied the yin-yang principle that governed all aspects of Chinese imperial philosophy: tea's cooling, contemplative nature, perfectly balanced by wine's warming, socially lubricating effects. Imperial banquets themselves represented theatrical productions, staged with precision, that would make modern event planners weep with admiration and terror. These weren't casual dinner parties, where friends gathered to share food and conversation. They were elaborate performances designed to demonstrate absolute power, unlimited generosity, and unquestionable control over both natural resources and human behavior. Every element was choreographed to send specific messages about imperial authority and cosmic legitimacy. The logistics behind a major imperial feast bordered on miraculous. Preparing for state banquets required months of advanced planning, involving hundreds of kitchen staff, agricultural coordinators who managed seasonal ingredient availability, diplomatic protocol specialists who understood the cultural preferences of foreign guests, and security personnel who ensured that no one could poison the emperor through culinary sabotage. The scale of these operations rivaled military campaigns in their complexity and resource requirements. A typical imperial banquet could feature more than 100 different dishes, though this abundance wasn't intended for actual consumption by any individual guest. The sheer variety served multiple purposes, demonstrating that imperial kitchens could produce anything imaginable, overwhelming foreign visitors with evidence of Chinese prosperity, and ensuring that every possible dietary restriction or cultural preference was accommodated without requiring advance notice. The message was clear. Imperial resources were so vast that waste itself became a demonstration of wealth. The serving choreography resembled ballet performed by highly trained professionals who understood that a single mistake could mean immediate dismissal or worse. Servants glided through banquet halls with supernatural silence, replenishing teacups before they emptied, whisking away finished plates before guests realized they were done eating, and maintaining perfect awareness of imperial mood and preference throughout meals that could last for days. Each movement reinforced the hierarchy that placed the emperor at the absolute center of both earthly society and cosmic order. Seating arrangements at imperial banquets functioned as visible displays of political relationships and diplomatic status. Guests were positioned according to carefully calculated protocols that considered their official rank, current imperial favor, strategic importance to state interests, and potential threats to imperial authority. To be seated closer to the emperor represented tremendous honor and access to power. To find yourself relegated to distant tables sent unmistakable messages about your political standing and future prospects. The banquet hall architecture itself reinforced imperial messaging through overwhelming scale and artistic magnificence. The dining spaces in the Forbidden City were designed to make guests feel simultaneously honored and insignificant, privileged to share the emperor's presence while clearly understanding their subordinate position in the cosmic hierarchy. Golden dragons writhed across ceiling murals. Precious stones gleamed in lamplight, and the very dimensions of these rooms declared that earthly power resided exclusively with the Son of Heaven. Foreign diplomacy often succeeded or failed based on imperial banquet performances. Envoys from Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Central Asian kingdoms, and Southeast Asian trading states were systematically dazzled with spreads of shark fin soup, bird's nest delicacies, and exotic meats that would be impossible to replicate in their home territories. These meals weren't simply generous hospitality, they were edible demonstrations of Chinese wealth and technological superiority, designed to remind foreign visitors that challenging the Middle Kingdom would be futile and potentially catastrophic. Many crucial treaties were negotiated not in formal council chambers but between courses of delicacies that guests had never imagined could exist. The psychological impact of consuming impossible foods while surrounded by unimaginable luxury created mental states where signing tributary agreements seemed not only reasonable but necessary for maintaining access to Chinese protection and trade opportunities. Diplomacy through cuisine proved remarkably effective at securing political compliance without requiring military threats. The timing of imperial banquets reflected deep understanding of political psychology and seasonal rhythms. Major feasts coincided with successful military campaigns, important anniversaries of dynastic founding, installation ceremonies for crown princes, and reception of tribute from vassal states. These occasions transformed routine political events into cosmic celebrations that reinforced the emperor's divine mandate and his dynasty's legitimacy through shared consumption of blessed food. Even the modern Chinese state dinner tradition traces its lineage directly back to these imperial banquet principles. Contemporary Chinese leaders continue hosting elaborate meals for foreign dignitaries that subtly echo ancient practices, demonstrating prosperity through culinary abundance, building relationships through shared dining experiences, and using food selection to communicate cultural values and political priorities. The dishes may have evolved, but the underlying philosophy remains remarkably consistent across millennia. The legacy of imperial Chinese banquet culture extends far beyond historical curiosity. Modern business practices in Chinese-influenced societies still reflect these ancient principles. Important negotiations conducted over elaborate meals, relationship, building through generous hospitality, and status demonstration through expensive ingredients and exclusive venues. Understanding this cultural continuity helps explain why meals remain so crucial to Chinese business and diplomatic practices, even in contemporary international relations. To witness an imperial Chinese banquet was to observe power made edible, authority transformed into cuisine, and politics disguised as hospitality. These events represented the pinnacle of civilization, not just because of their luxury, but because they demonstrated humanity's ability to transform basic survival needs into profound expressions of culture, creativity, and cosmic harmony. Now we shift from the opulent dining halls of imperial China to one of history's most extraordinary archaeological discoveries, a find so remarkable that it redefined our understanding of ancient Chinese civilization and proved that sometimes the most incredible stories turn out to be absolutely true. But this tale begins not with grand archaeological expeditions or scholarly research, but with China's first emperor and his terrifying obsession with cheating death itself. Qin Shi Huang wasn't content with merely unifying the warring states of China into a single empire. By 221 BCE, he had accomplished what seemed impossible, forging 7 independent kingdoms into one nation, standardizing currency, weights, measures, and even the axle widths of carts so they could travel the same roads throughout his territory. He centralized governmental power in ways no previous ruler had imagined possible, creating administrative systems that would influence Chinese governance for thousands of years. But for all his earthly triumphs and political innovations, one enemy continued to mock his achievements: the inevitable reality of human mortality. The emperor's obsession with achieving immortality became legendary among court chroniclers and remains one of history's most documented cases of powerful delusion. He surrounded himself with alchemists who promised him potions that could grant eternal life, many of these elixirs containing mercury, lead, and other toxic minerals that were slowly poisoning him even as he consumed them, seeking longevity. The irony was cruel. The very substances meant to extend his existence were likely accelerating his death. But his desperation for immortality blinded him to this obvious contradiction. Qin Shi Huang didn't rely solely on alchemical solutions to his mortality problem. He also turned his considerable ambition toward architectural immortality, commissioning the construction of a tomb complex that would serve as his eternal palace and ensure his continued rule from beyond the grave. This wasn't going to be a simple burial mound where a deceased ruler would rest quietly with a few grave goods. Instead, he envisioned an entire subterranean empire that would mirror the world he governed above ground, complete with palaces, administrative offices, stables, entertainment facilities, and most importantly, a fully equipped army ready to defend his eternal reign. Historical records suggest that over 700,000 laborers were conscripted for this massive construction project, working for decades to complete what would become one of the most ambitious building projects in human history. Many of these workers never returned home, either dying from exhaustion and dangerous working conditions, or being deliberately killed to preserve the tomb's secrets. The emperor's paranoia about grave robbers and political enemies meant that secrecy was enforced through the permanent elimination of anyone who possessed detailed knowledge about the tomb's layout and treasures. At the heart of this underground domain lay the most astonishing creation of all: an army of life-sized clay soldiers, each one individually crafted with unique facial features, hairstyles, expressions, and equipment. These weren't symbolic representations or artistic abstractions. They were detailed, fully armed warriors, complete with bronze weapons that remained sharp and deadly millennia later. The scale of this project reflected Qin Shi Huang's megalomaniacal vision of immortality, where death might claim his physical body but could never diminish his imperial authority. The emperor's tomb became one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, a burial site that was sealed, guarded, and surrounded by legends of flowing mercury rivers and deadly traps, designed to kill anyone who dared disturb the eternal emperor's rest. Ancient historians wrote about this subterranean palace, but their descriptions sounded so fantastical that most scholars dismissed them as mythological exaggerations. For over 2,000 years, the Terracotta Army remained hidden beneath the soil of Shaanxi province, silent and forgotten while dynasties rose and fell above them. Then came the spring of 1974, when a group of peasant farmers near the village of Lintong were desperately digging a well during a severe drought that threatened their agricultural survival. Their shovels were seeking water, not history, when they struck something hard buried in the clay soil. At first, the obstruction seemed like ordinary debris, perhaps old pottery shards or building materials left behind by previous generations. But as they continued digging, a human face emerged from the dirt, sculpted in clay with remarkable detail and realism. The farmers' discovery quickly escalated beyond their comprehension. More fragments appeared as they expanded their excavation. Torsos, arms, pieces of weapons, and evidence of a much larger structure buried beneath their feet. What they had stumbled upon wasn't merely an artifact or even a collection of pottery. It was the edge of an army that had been sleeping underground since the time when Alexander the Great was conquering the Mediterranean world. Local authorities were notified, and news of the discovery spread through academic networks with unprecedented speed. Archaeologists rushed to the site from Beijing and other major research centers, realizing almost immediately that they were confronting one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century. As professional excavation began, the true scale of the discovery became apparent. Pit after pit revealed row upon row of clay warriors, each standing in perfect military formation, as though waiting for orders that would never come. The initial excavation revealed not dozens or even hundreds of sculptures, but thousands of individual soldiers arranged in precise battle formations. Each figure was unique, bearing distinct facial features, expressions, and equipment that suggested the artisans had used real soldiers as models. This wasn't mass production of identical statues. It was an individually crafted army where every warrior possessed his own identity and character, frozen in clay for eternity. The discovery stunned the international archaeological community and captivated global public attention. This was not simply an important historical find. It was a time capsule that offered unprecedented insight into ancient Chinese military organization, artistic capabilities, and imperial ambition. The Terracotta Army represented physical proof of stories that historians had considered largely mythological, confirming that ancient Chinese civilization had achieved levels of sophistication and scale that rivaled any ancient culture. For the farmers who made the initial discovery, the find brought both tremendous disruption and unexpected fame. Their agricultural land was transformed overnight into one of the world's most important archaeological sites, ending their farming careers, but providing them with new roles as local celebrities who could sign guidebooks and tell their story to millions of visitors. Some of the discoverers embraced their newfound fame, while others mourned the loss of their simple farming lifestyle and the disruption of their traditional communities. The village of Lintong itself underwent radical transformation as the site became a major tourist destination, attracting millions of visitors annually. Hotels, restaurants, museums, and entire industries developed around the archaeological site, bringing economic prosperity, but also fundamentally altering the character of what had been a quiet rural community. The farmers who had prayed for water during a drought had inadvertently uncovered a treasure that would forever change their lives and their homeland. The excavation process revealed that what they had discovered represented only a fraction of a much larger complex. The Terracotta Army was vast, but the emperor's actual tomb, said to contain unimaginable treasures and deadly mercury rivers, remained sealed beneath a prominent burial mound that archaeologists could see but dared not open. The discovery was simultaneously a revelation and a tantalizing preview of even greater secrets that remained hidden underground. International recognition followed quickly. The terracotta army became one of China's most recognizable cultural exports, with exhibitions traveling to major museums worldwide and drawing record-breaking crowds wherever they appeared. The clay soldiers, with their hauntingly human faces and perfect preservation, became global symbols of Chinese civilization and artistic achievement. They carried not just the story of Qin Shi Huang's megalomania, but the narrative of a culture that could conceive and execute projects of almost unimaginable scope and ambition. The site's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage location confirmed its importance as one of humanity's most significant cultural treasures. The Terracotta Army joined the ranks of Machu Picchu, the Pyramids of Giza, and other archaeological wonders that represent pinnacles of human creativity and engineering achievement. But unlike many ancient sites that survive only as ruins, the Terracotta Army remained remarkably intact, offering visitors the opportunity to witness ancient Chinese craftsmanship in nearly perfect condition. For the Chinese government, the discovery provided powerful validation of national pride and cultural continuity. At a time when China was emerging from the upheavals of the Cultural Revolution and beginning its transformation into a modern economic power, the Terracotta Army offered proof that Chinese civilization had created wonders comparable to any in human history. The soldiers became ambassadors for Chinese culture, reminding both citizens and foreigners that China's historical achievements deserved international respect and admiration. The discovery also raised profound questions about how modern China should interpret its imperial past. Qin Shi Huang was simultaneously celebrated as the unifier who created the foundation of Chinese national identity and condemned as a tyrant whose brutal methods included burning books, burying scholars alive, and conscripting massive armies of forced laborers. The Terracotta Army allowed the government to emphasize his achievements while leaving his darker legacy in the shadows, using the archaeological wonder to promote national unity rather than historical controversy. The timing of the discovery proved fortuitous for China's international relations and economic development. As the country began opening to foreign tourism and investment, the Terracotta Army provided a compelling attraction that could draw international visitors and demonstrate China's cultural sophistication. The site became a crucial component of China's cultural diplomacy, offering foreign leaders and dignitaries a dramatic introduction to Chinese history and artistic capabilities. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this discovery was how it transformed our understanding of ancient Chinese capabilities. Before 1974, many Western scholars underestimated the organizational skills and artistic achievements of early Chinese civilization. The Terracotta Army provided undeniable evidence that Chinese artisans and engineers had mastered techniques of incredible sophistication over 2,000 years ago, creating works of art that remained impressive even by modern standards. The farmers who discovered the first fragments in 1974 had inadvertently opened a window into one of history's most ambitious attempts to conquer death through art and architecture. Their simple search for water during a drought had revealed humanity's eternal struggle with mortality and power, preserved in clay for over 2 millennia and waiting for the right moment to emerge into modern consciousness. When archaeologists finally brushed away centuries of accumulated earth and debris, they were confronted with an army frozen in eternal formation that defied every expectation about ancient Chinese artistic capabilities. Stretching across massive excavation pits, thousands of life-sized terracotta soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder in precise military formations, arranged with the disciplined order of an actual Qin dynasty battalion prepared for battle. What initially struck observers was the overwhelming scale of the discovery, but what truly amazed them was the remarkable individuality that characterized every single warrior. No two faces were identical among the thousands of clay soldiers. Each warrior bore unique facial features that suggested real human models. Stern jawlines carved with mathematical precision, crooked noses that spoke of past battles, faint smiles that hinted at private jokes. and grimaces that reflected the serious business of eternal military service. The artisans had created not a generic army of mass-produced statues, but rather a legion of individuals where every soldier possessed his own distinct personality, frozen in clay for over 2 millennia. The diversity extended far beyond facial features into military hierarchy and regional representation. Uniforms and hairstyles clearly marked different ranks within the army structure. Generals stood prominently with elaborate armor and commanding expressions that radiated authority even across centuries. Archers crouched in perfect firing stances, their muscles tensed as though they could release arrows at any moment. Cavalrymen held bronze reins for horses that had long since crumbled to dust, while infantry soldiers wore practical tunics designed for extended campaign duty rather than ceremonial display. The level of detail suggested that artisans had studied real soldiers as living models, observing actual military personnel to capture authentic poses, expressions, and equipment configurations. This wasn't symbolic art created from imagination. It was military realism documented in clay with anthropological precision. The sculptors had paid attention to details that only people with intimate knowledge of army life would notice. The way soldiers stand when at attention, how cavalry officers hold reins, the facial expressions of men accustomed to following orders and facing danger. The craftsmanship extended to aspects of the army that visitors today cannot see. Recent technological advances in archaeological analysis have revealed that the terracotta soldiers were originally painted in vibrant colors that brought them startlingly to life. Reds, blues, purples, greens, and earth tones covered uniforms, armor, weapons, and even facial features, creating an underground army that would have appeared shockingly realistic to anyone entering the tomb chambers. Time and exposure to air caused most pigments to flake away within minutes of excavation, leaving the soldiers in the muted earth tones we see today. But in their prime, they would have looked like actual soldiers standing underground in perfect formation. Behind every terracotta soldier stands an invisible army of workers, craftsmen, laborers, and artisans whose extraordinary skill and profound suffering gave physical form to Qin Shi Huang's megalomaniacal vision of eternal rule. Historical records suggest that as many as 700,000 people were conscripted to build the entire mausoleum complex. From a number so vast, it rivaled the populations of entire cities and represented one of the largest construction projects in human history. These weren't volunteers motivated by patriotic enthusiasm or religious devotion. They were prisoners of war captured during the unification campaigns, convicted criminals sentenced to forced labor, and common peasants pressed into decades of back-breaking service, with no realistic hope of returning to their previous lives. The scale of human suffering required to create this underground paradise defied comprehension, representing one of history's most extreme examples of individual ambition pursued at the cost of mass human sacrifice. The artistic work demanded extraordinary precision and individual attention that mass production techniques could never achieve. Each soldier began as separate hollow clay sections, legs, torso, arms, and head, molded individually and then assembled like components of a massive three-dimensional puzzle. Once the basic figure took shape, master artisans carved details by hand, facial wrinkles that suggested age and experience, elaborate mustaches that indicated rank and regional origin, intricate hair braids that reflected military traditions, and even individual scars that told stories of past battles. The individuality of each face strongly suggests that real soldiers served as models for these clay portraits, their likenesses immortalized in terracotta to create a diverse representation of the unified Chinese Empire. This wasn't art for artistic expression. It was propaganda designed to proclaim the ethnic diversity and military strength of Qin's territory. Every regional facial type, every different hairstyle, every variation in uniform represented populations that had been conquered and integrated into the imperial army. After shaping and detailing, the statues underwent firing in kilns that hardened the clay into permanent forms, a process that made them life-sized and durable, but also inherently fragile. The logistical challenges of firing thousands of large clay figures required industrial-scale ceramic production facilities and fuel resources that strained the empire's capabilities. Then came the painting process, where artists applied the vibrant colors that transformed clay sculptures into lifelike soldiers ready for eternal service. Yet behind this artistic brilliance lay systematic cruelty that reflected the emperor's paranoid obsession with secrecy and control. Workers labored under conditions of extreme secrecy, bound by imperial paranoia about protecting the tomb's location and contents from future grave robbers or political enemies. Ancient historians claim that once construction was completed and the tomb sealed, many of the artisans and laborers were killed or deliberately trapped inside the complex to ensure that its mysteries remained hidden forever. Whether these accounts represent historical fact or legendary exaggeration, they fit perfectly with Qin Shi Huang's documented ruthlessness, a ruler who demanded absolute loyalty even unto death, and viewed human lives as expendable resources in pursuit of his immortal ambitions. The terracotta army therefore represents both a triumph of artistic achievement and a monument to the human cost of unchecked imperial power. The army wasn't merely a clay spectacle designed to impress visitors. It was armed to the teeth with real bronze weapons that remained deadly sharp after 2 millennia underground. When archaeologists uncovered the excavation pits, they discovered thousands of authentic bronze weapons alongside the soldiers. Swords with razor edges, halberds designed for cavalry combat, spears for infantry formations, and crossbow bolts manufactured with industrial precision. Many of these weapons were still sharp enough to cut, their edges gleaming with an unusual luster that initially baffled materials scientists. Early speculation suggested that ancient Chinese craftsmen had discovered chrome plating techniques centuries before modern metallurgy, but later analysis revealed that the preservation resulted from careful polishing techniques combined with the unique soil chemistry of the burial environment. Regardless of the exact preservation mechanism, the fact remained that these weapons had endured remarkably well, providing dramatic evidence of Qin dynasty technological capabilities. The crossbows found among the terracotta soldiers were particularly advanced, featuring trigger mechanisms made of bronze with precision engineering, so sophisticated that even after 2,000 years, many could still function when tested by modern archaeologists. The bolts were mass-produced in standardized sizes that demonstrated the empire's commitment to logistical efficiency. Any archer could pick up any crossbow bolt and it would fit his weapon perfectly, a level of manufacturing standardization rarely seen in the ancient world. Armor fragments provided additional evidence of the army's realistic military preparation. Though fewer armor examples survived the centuries compared to bronze weapons, the remaining pieces suggested elaborate leather and bronze scale armor that once protected the clay soldiers. The detailed carvings on the statues themselves show clear hierarchy in protective equipment. Generals wearing ornate gear suitable for command positions, infantry equipped with practical protection designed for battlefield mobility, and archers clothed in lighter armor that allowed for rapid movement and precise shooting. Even the arrangement of weapons throughout the excavation sites reflected sophisticated battlefield strategy and military doctrine. Archers were positioned at the front and flanks of formations, ready to provide covering fire for advancing troops. Infantry soldiers stood in tight formations designed for mutual protection and coordinated movement, while cavalry and chariot units anchored the wings in positions that would allow for rapid flanking maneuvers against enemy forces. This wasn't random decoration or artistic interpretation. It was Qin Shi Huang's actual military strategy recreated underground with meticulous attention to tactical detail. The same battle formations that had crushed rival states and unified China were carefully reproduced in clay and bronze, ensuring that the emperor's proven methods of conquest would defend him throughout eternity. To stand among these excavation pits today is to witness not just archaeological wonder, but also engineering genius that bridges the gap between ancient history and military science. The weapons and tactical arrangements provide concrete evidence of how Qin's armies achieved their remarkable success, while simultaneously demonstrating the emperor's determination to maintain military superiority even in death. As impressive as the terracotta army appears to modern visitors, it represents only the prologue to an even greater mystery that has tantalized archaeologists for decades. The clay soldiers guard a vast burial mound that has never been opened, the actual tomb of Qin Shi Huang himself. According to ancient historical sources, this mausoleum was designed as a complete subterranean palace, intended to replicate the empire he had ruled in life, featuring rivers and seas made of liquid mercury, powered by ingenious mechanical systems that mimicked the natural world above ground. The historian Sima Qian, writing approximately 1 century after Qin's death, described a tomb filled with incredible treasures, crossbow traps designed to kill intruders, and elaborate booby traps that would eliminate anyone who dared disturb the eternal emperor's rest. Stars were supposedly painted on the ceiling to mirror the night sky, while pearls simulated the glow of moon and planets. The emperor, paranoid even in death about political enemies and grave robbers, had demanded that his resting place remain absolutely untouchable throughout eternity. Modern scientific analysis lends eerie credibility to these ancient descriptions. Soil samples collected around the burial mound reveal unusually high concentrations of mercury, suggesting that the toxic rivers described by Sima Qian may actually exist beneath the artificial hill. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive archaeological techniques have detected large underground chambers and what appears to be a complex drainage system, but the tomb itself remains sealed and unexplored. So why hasn't this potentially treasure-filled chamber been opened by eager archaeologists? The primary reason involves legitimate scientific and preservation concerns. Modern archaeology has learned painful lessons about the destructive effects of exposing ancient artifacts to contemporary atmospheric conditions. The painted terracotta soldiers lost their vibrant colors within minutes of contact with modern air, and similar preservation disasters have occurred at archaeological sites worldwide, when excavation techniques proved inadequate for protecting delicate materials. Imagine the irreparable damage that could occur if the tomb contains 2,000-year-old wood, silk, paper, or other organic materials that would disintegrate immediately upon exposure to oxygen and humidity levels different from their long-term storage conditions. Current technology simply isn't advanced enough to guarantee safe excavation, without potentially destroying priceless artifacts that have survived intact for over 2 millennia. There are also significant ethical and political considerations surrounding the decision to disturb Qin Shi Huang's final resting place. The emperor occupies a complex position in Chinese historical consciousness, simultaneously celebrated as the unifier who created the foundation of Chinese national identity, and condemned as a tyrant whose brutal methods included burning books, burying scholars alive, and conscripting massive forced labor armies. Opening his tomb would inevitably spark contentious debates about how his legacy should be interpreted and whether disturbing his remains shows appropriate respect for Chinese cultural heritage. For now, the burial mound stands as one of archaeology's last great sealed time capsules, visible to visitors, but forever beyond reach. The mystery only intensifies the fascination surrounding Qin Shi Huang's eternal ambitions. Beneath that artificial hill may lie treasures beyond imagination. Golden artifacts, jade sculptures, silk tapestries, and written records that could revolutionize our understanding of ancient Chinese civilization. Alternatively, the tomb might contain nothing but collapsed tunnels filled with toxic mercury vapor, and the skeletal remains of an emperor whose megalomania ultimately created his own elaborate prison. until technology advances sufficiently to guarantee safe excavation, or until political attitudes shift regarding the appropriateness of disturbing imperial burials, Qin Shi Huang will continue resting in secretive silence, guarded by his clay army and protected by the very mystery that has made him one of history's most intriguing figures. His true tomb remains the ultimate archaeological cliffhanger, visible to millions of tourists but perpetually out of reach, promising revelations that may never come. The sealed tomb represents perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of the entire terracotta army discovery. While the clay soldiers have already provided unprecedented insights into ancient Chinese military organization, artistic capabilities, and imperial ambition, they also serve as eternal sentries, guarding secrets that may be far more significant than anything yet discovered. The Emperor's final resting place continues to mock both archaeologists and tourists with its proximity and inaccessibility, a reminder that some historical mysteries may be destined to remain unsolved. The terracotta army was never intended to be merely a security detail for the afterlife. It was propaganda baked into clay, designed to broadcast imperial power across both time and space. Qin Shi Huang understood the psychological impact of spectacle better than most modern politicians. Throughout his living reign, he had constructed massive roads, walls, and palaces, specifically to demonstrate that his authority was absolute and his resources unlimited. In death, he commanded a clay army to transmit the same message, that even the grave could not diminish his imperial dominance. Each soldier standing in those underground pits represented far more than military protection. They were symbols of unity forged from diversity. The first emperor had accomplished something unprecedented in Chinese history, welding 7 warring states into a single empire through a combination of military conquest, administrative genius, and sheer force of will. The variety among the terracotta warriors, their different facial features, hairstyles, armor styles, and regional characteristics deliberately mirrored the ethnic and cultural diversity of the populations now united under imperial rule. The message embedded in clay was unmistakable. Farmers from distant provinces, hunters from mountain regions, and warriors from rival kingdoms had all been transformed into loyal servants of the unified state. The emperor's reach extended across all territories and all peoples, and his authority would persist throughout eternity. To observe the terracotta army was to witness the physical manifestation of imperial propaganda that proclaimed Qin's dominance over both geography and mortality. The psychological warfare aspect of this underground force cannot be overstated. Imagine being an ordinary citizen in ancient China and hearing whispered stories that your emperor possessed an entire subterranean army, complete with weapons, horses, and chariots, waiting to defend him after death. Such tales reinforced the perception that Qin Shi Huang transcended normal human limitations. He was not merely a mortal ruler, but a figure chosen by heaven whose authority extended beyond the boundaries of life itself. Even the construction process served propagandistic purposes, conscripting hundreds of thousands of laborers for decades-long building projects, reminded everyone that the emperor's will could mobilize unimaginable human resources. The artisans who sculpted individual faces may have believed they were creating unique artistic works, but collectively, those soldiers became a monolithic representation of imperial obedience, diverse people molded into a single, unstoppable imperial machine. More than 2,000 years later, the terracotta army continues fulfilling its propaganda mission with remarkable effectiveness. Modern tourists from around the world stand in awe before these clay ranks, experiencing the same mixture of wonder and intimidation that ancient subjects once felt before Qin's massive architectural projects. The emperor's message of power, permanence, and cultural achievement has endured far longer than his actual dynasty, proving that sometimes the most effective propaganda is that which transcends its original political context. For contemporary China, the Terracotta Army has become a symbol of national pride that serves multiple diplomatic and cultural purposes. The discovery provided powerful validation of Chinese civilization's ancient achievements at precisely the moment when the country was emerging from internal upheaval and beginning its transformation into a modern global power. The clay soldiers became cultural ambassadors, demonstrating to both domestic and international audiences that Chinese history deserved recognition alongside the greatest civilizations of antiquity. The international exhibitions of terracotta warriors have drawn record-breaking crowds in museums worldwide, carrying China's cultural message to millions of people who might never visit the excavation sites themselves. These traveling displays function as sophisticated cultural diplomacy, using ancient art to build modern relationships and demonstrate China's commitment to sharing its heritage with the global community. But the Terracotta Army's modern significance extends beyond tourism and cultural exchange. It represents tangible proof that Chinese civilization achieved remarkable organizational sophistication and artistic excellence over 2 millennia ago, countering any remaining Western assumptions about ancient Chinese capabilities. The precision of the craftsmanship, the scale of the project, and the advanced metallurgy of the bronze weapons provide undeniable evidence of technological and administrative achievements that rivals anything produced by contemporary civilizations. The discovery also demonstrates how archaeological finds can reshape national identity and international perception. Before 1974, many people outside China had limited appreciation for ancient Chinese artistic and engineering capabilities. The Terracotta Army provided dramatic, undeniable evidence that demanded a fundamental reassessment of Chinese historical significance and cultural contributions to human civilization. Yet perhaps the most profound aspect of the Terracotta Army's legacy lies in its representation of humanity's eternal struggle with mortality and the desire for lasting significance. Qin Shi Huang's clay soldiers stand as a monument to the human refusal to accept death as final defeat, even when that refusal leads to megalomaniacal projects built on the suffering of others. They remind us that the desire for immortality can inspire both remarkable creativity and terrible cruelty, often simultaneously. Now, let us journey from the underground palaces of Chinese emperors to the wind-swept shores of the Adriatic Sea, where another ancient people carved their identity from stone, salt water, and the constant struggle against an unforgiving environment. The Illyrians were born of geography that demanded resilience. Their homeland stretched along the jagged eastern coast of the Adriatic, where mountains plunged directly into deep water and fertile valleys remained frustratingly rare. This harsh landscape created a people who turned necessity into cultural identity. Unlike the vast agricultural plains that supported Chinese civilization, Illyrian territory offered limited opportunities for farming or herding. Survival demanded mastery of the sea, and the Adriatic became both highway and pantry for communities that learned to extract life from salt, water, and rocky shores. From childhood, Illyrians were raised with the sound of waves as their constant soundtrack and the smell of sea salt permanently embedded in their lungs. Fishing provided daily sustenance, but the Adriatic quickly revealed itself as much more than a food source. It was a network of opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. The coastline's countless inlets, hidden coves, and scattered islands provided perfect hiding places for communities that understood how to use geography as both shield and weapon. This maritime environment shaped more than just economic strategies. It forged a cultural identity built around seamanship, courage, and the kind of practical opportunism that others would label as piracy. Illyrian villages clung to cliff tops overlooking narrow harbors, where boats could be launched quickly and concealed effectively. Men and women alike developed skills in navigation, sail repair, and rowing against unpredictable currents that could shift from calm to deadly within minutes. the Illyrians became masters of the lembus, a vessel specifically designed for speed, stealth, and shallow water operations. These ships were long, narrow, and lightweight, capable of slipping into coastal areas where larger vessels couldn't follow. Unlike the heavy merchant ships that relied entirely on wind power, lembi were propelled primarily by oars, giving their crews tactical flexibility that proved devastating in combat situations. A squadron of lembi could appear seemingly from nowhere, swarm a target from multiple directions, and disappear back into the coastal maze before victims could organize effective resistance. To Mediterranean merchants, spotting the distinctive silhouettes of Illyrian lembi on the horizon became synonymous with financial disaster and possible death. For the Illyrians themselves, what others called piracy was simply another form of maritime commerce, an adaptation to geographic limitations that made traditional agriculture insufficient for survival. Raiding merchant vessels represented practical resource acquisition in an environment where waiting for crops to grow was a luxury few communities could afford. A single successful raid might yield grain, wine, oil, cloth, and slaves, sufficient to sustain an entire tribe through difficult seasons. This maritime lifestyle produced leaders like Queen Tuta, who in the 3rd century BCE became the most famous example of Illyrian defiance against expanding Roman power. After her husband, King Agron, died, Tuta refused to step aside for male regents, and instead seized control of both the kingdom and its naval forces. Under her command, Illyrian piracy reached scales that threatened Roman commercial interests throughout the Adriatic. Tuta's leadership style reflected the maritime culture that had shaped her people for generations. She understood naval strategy, commanded fleets of lembi with personal authority, and extended Illyrian influence along coastlines from Epirus to Greece. For Romans accustomed to dealing with land-based kingdoms, confronting a queen who ruled from the deck of a warship presented novel diplomatic and military challenges. According to Roman historians, who were admittedly hostile to powerful women who defied Roman authority, Tuta dismissed Roman envoys with arrogance, allegedly declaring that piracy was a traditional right of her people that she would not forbid. Whether these accounts accurately represent her words or reflect Roman propaganda, they captured an essential truth about Illyrian culture. Maritime raiding was not shameful criminal activity, but honorable tradition that had sustained coastal communities for centuries. The collision between Illyrian maritime independence and Roman imperial ambition was inevitable. As Rome expanded its influence eastward, the Adriatic became crucial for trade routes connecting Italy with Greece and Asia Minor. Illyrian raids were no longer mere criminal nuisances, but direct challenges to Roman commercial interests and imperial prestige. The First Illyrian War in 229 BCE marked Rome's initial major naval intervention outside Italian waters. Roman fleets swept into the Adriatic with overwhelming force, targeting Illyrian strongholds and offering protection to Greek city-states that had suffered from Illyrian raids. The speed and scale of Roman response demonstrated that the Republic possessed naval capabilities that could project power across substantial distances. Tuta's lembi, formidable in surprise attacks against merchant vessels, proved inadequate against Roman disciplined naval formations. Roman ships were larger, more heavily armed, and supported by marines trained specifically for boarding combat. The tactical advantages that had made Illyrians masters of ambush warfare became liabilities when confronting an enemy that brought systematic organization and superior resources to naval conflict. By 228 BCE, Tuta was forced to accept a humiliating treaty that stripped away much of her naval authority and restricted Illyrian maritime activities. The terms effectively ended Illyrian dominance of the Adriatic, transforming what had been Illyrian territorial waters into a Roman-controlled transportation network. Subsequent Illyrian resistance proved increasingly futile as Roman power continued expanding. Kings like Demetrius of Pharos and Gentius attempted to rebuild Illyrian naval capabilities and challenge Roman authority, but each uprising brought harsher retaliation and further restrictions on Illyrian independence. By 168 BCE, the final Illyrian kingdom was dismantled and absorbed into Roman provincial administration. The conquest of Illyria represented more than military victory. It marked the end of a maritime culture that had defined the Adriatic for centuries. The lembi that had once terrorized merchant convoys were broken up or converted to Roman uses. Coastal communities that had survived through raiding and fishing were forced to adapt to Roman economic systems and legal structures. The Adriatic itself was transformed from Illyrian hunting ground into Roman highway. Yet the Illyrian maritime legacy endured in ways that Roman conquest could not completely eliminate. Coastal populations retained their seamanship skills, passing down knowledge of navigation, boat construction, and maritime survival through generations of foreign rule. The geographic advantages that had originally shaped Illyrian culture, protected harbours, hidden coastlines, and intimate knowledge of local waters, remained valuable even under Roman administration. The story of Illyrian maritime culture reminds us that history is shaped not only by great empires and famous battles, but also by the persistent human struggle to adapt to environmental challenges and create meaning from geographical pointing point. Necessity. The Illyrians transformed the harsh realities of rocky coastlines and limited agricultural opportunities into a distinctive culture that valued courage, seamanship, and the kind of practical resilience that others called piracy, but they considered survival. Their legacy lives on wherever small maritime communities continue to extract livelihood from dangerous waters, wherever coastal peoples maintain independence through superior knowledge of local geography, and wherever the romance of the sea continues to inspire those who refuse to be bound by land-based limitations. The Illyrians may have lost their political independence to Roman expansion, but they preserved something more enduring, the memory of a people who made the sea their highway to freedom.